over the last few days, there have been a series of vandalisms um, in temples, Hindu temples in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh. There was a case in Ramatirtham, another I think in Vijayawada, and another one near to Rajahmundry in East Godavari district. This is not simply some kind of recent phenomenon. This kind of thing has been going on for for years. Um, so, for those of you who don't know, the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh, which is kind of in on the Bay of Bengal, so kind of on the eastern coast of the peninsula, is the hotspot of evangelical Christian mission activity in India. Another thing, I don't intend in any way to express prejudice or hatred against any particular group. I in no way intend for this video to invoke a personal backlash against Christians either abroad or in India. I also don't want to use this video to espouse any extreme views. And any comments either expressing hatred towards a particular group or those that, rather than engaging with what I'm saying intellectually, simply attack me or refer to me as a bhakt or a sanghi or a Modi supporter, which I am not overtly pro Modi. Any such claim shall be reported, and any such comment will be deleted. Some of you are probably wondering, okay, fine, but why is Christianity so problematic? Why pick on the Christians? As in, why Christianity? And I'll illustrate that with two examples. So in the first example, let's imagine that there's a household in that region. They practice Hindu customs. They visit the local Balaji temple every week. They bring home laddus, which is kind of sweet, as prasadam. They perform puja at home, and they have a certain set of kind of family traditions and customs, and that binds people together. Now let's imagine one day someone approaches one of the members of the household and they tell them about Buddhism. They explain about the Four Noble Truths, how all of us have to, how in order to transcend suffering, one has to develop awareness not only of the external world, but also of one's internal world. And with this awareness, one begins to become separate from harmful mental dispositions, known in Sanskrit as kleshas. So this member of the household starts learning more and more about Buddhist philosophy and starts practicing Buddhist practices like meditation. And they find those things very helpful. So they begin to share their experiences with the family. The family also takes on board many of the same teachings and starts doing taking part in Buddhist meditation practices, and the family benefits. But again, this has no impact on the family traditions. Although there are some modern Buddhist movements, some kind of Buddhist movements from the 20th century, which are really political, that do see themselves as being anti-Hindu, large by and large, um, Buddhism has never had this displacive effect on a person's traditions. And Hindu deities are also a large part of Buddhist practices, even far outside of India. Um, if I take the case of Buddhism, Buddhism has a tendency to combine itself with the traditions, the religious practices of different cultures, and it doesn't take anything away. And in the example that I gave, um, the family would still retain their same practices. The introduction of Buddhist teachings would not cause any family tension. Now, let's take a different example. Let's suppose that in this village there's another family, and one day the family's daughter finds out about. Now let's take another example. Let's suppose that there's also another family, and like the first, they also visit the temple every week. They bring home prasadam, they take part in puja, they do all of the rituals, um, and this is what binds the family together. But suppose, let's say, the daughter kind of the daughter takes part in these rituals because that's what she's known. These are what she has encountered growing up, but she doesn't necessarily understand why her family takes part in these rituals, or burning agarbatti or incense around an image or murti, why that has any effect. But she doesn't really think much about it. Then one day, someone approaches her. He tells her about the gospel, about Jesus. He explains that Jesus is the only way to be saved, and that unless one exclusively accepts Jesus as Lord, as one's sole authority, then one is going to spend forever and eternity after one dies intensely suffering. The daughter is almost kind of shocked, um, and she's always wondered, why do I why do I take part in these rituals? Um why do I kind of burn incense around my biology murti? And she also finds out that her family customs are an act of rebellion against the one true God. And these are Christian teachings. These are not kind of fringe ideas that only kind of a certain minority of Christians accept. These are the standard essential Christian teachings found throughout the New Testament. Um, just in case in case anyone kind of says that I'm attacking Christians unfairly, or I'm misrepresenting Christians, or Christians couldn't possibly believe this stuff. This is what all Christians are supposed to believe. So the daughter's taken back, and she's really anxious about what's going to happen to her family. So she returns back home. She realizes that she can't take part in her family customs anymore, because as far as she now believes, they are evil, as it says various times throughout both testaments or the Bible. Um, for example, in Romans chapter 1, the use of images, or as the Bible says, idols in worship, is seen as the sign of a rebellious, declining society. And the Bible often associates the use of images in worship with illicit sexual practices. So there is so slowly this cognitive association forms, and the daughter of the household feels really uncomfortable when her family takes part in the practices. She can no longer go to the temple with them. She can't any longer participate in the same customs. She can't marry. She can't marry the person of her family's choosing, or she can't marry someone um, who would get on with the family, because because whomever she marries also wouldn't, because in Christianity, one is not supposed to marry someone from a different religion unless one is already married to them. If one is already married to them, then that's okay. But if one is not, then um, it's generally forbidden for Christians to marry non-Christians, which means that whomever the daughter marries also cannot engage with the family's traditions. The daughter takes down the murtis, the images of Balaji, or her deva, her deity, from her room. In some cases, some Christians might associate these things with evil. In some cases, even evil spirits, and I do know of cases where Christians have destroyed their own personal Hindu images or murtis. I don't know if that's especially common. So for this example, I'll just assume that the daughter of the household just takes these out of her room and gives them to her parents. But now you can begin to imagine that this new ideology that is exclusivistic, that demands exclusive obedience, that says that one's own traditions are evil. This ideology will create a lot of tension within families and between communities. And don't forget that now the daughter of the household is afraid for her parents. Again, according to the daughter's new religion, because her parents do things wrong, because her parents take part in Hindu customs, in devotion towards other gods, because her parents don't accept the same beliefs as her, then they will also suffer for eternity after they die. And so not only do we have this scenario where one of the members of the household cannot engage with her family in the same way, cannot engage in the things that united the family, but she also now, through no fault of her own, in many ways, has to try to take other to separate other members of her family away from their own traditions, just like her. And that's why Christianity, as opposed to other ideologies, is so divisive. In Indian epistemology, there's a phrase: where there's smoke, there's fire. In other words, where there's an effect, there is also a cause, or a set of causes. So we have established that Christianity, by its very core teachings, is divisive. And we have also established that in certain parts of the world, in the case of this video, in the Indian state of Andhra Pradesh, there is immense Christian proliferation, and most of this is fairly recent. It is Evangelical Christianity, and Evangelical Christianity doesn't generally have much of a historical foothold in India, unlike some other Christian movements within India. So so this is something that has mushroomed within the last few decades. One also has to be aware that a lot of Christian groups in this region have a lot of resources, and they also operate in villages that generally are not that wealthy, which makes one wonder why. Okay, why? How are these organizations so well funded or so well resourced if they operate in regions that are fairly poor? And of course, evangelical Christianity is much more of a Western Christian movement. Um, Many of these Christian organizations operating in the region have in the past received funding or backing from Western Christian groups or churches. Um, Now I think it's a bit more tricky to get funding because um, of certain rulings over the last few years. But generally, a lot of the funding, the resources, have come from the West. And many churches in America, in Europe, have what are known as mission partners. These are either local groups or overseas groups who partake in Christian activity, who are supported or funded by these churches. Some of them are really purely altruistic. They're just charity organizations that happen to be Christian. Others are much more orientated towards evangelism, which is sometimes referred to by non Christians as conversion. Um, Generally, Christians don't tend to use the term conversion. One would use the term evangelism. Um, and these churches, these church congregations, aren't funding overseas groups with necessarily with malicious intentions. Many of them have many of them find out about the work they fund from the organizations from the overseas organizations themselves. And so if if one imagines oneself as as a Christian in the West, one doesn't know much about the nations, the affected nations, but one hears about how these Christian groups are doing great things. They're uplifting communities. They're building hospitals, schools, buildings, things, planting new churches. One naturally thinks that by giving money to these groups, one is benefiting, one is enhancing overseas communities, and also spreading the love of Jesus as a bonus. Because that's what Western Christians hear. And sometimes people in these communities do clash with Christian groups. And when that happens, one hears that these Christian groups are being persecuted. And there are genuine cases where Christians in India have faced violence, um, like in parts of Odisha, the state north of Andhra Pradesh. But I think in the case of Andhra Pradesh, the assertion that Christians here are persecuted should be taken with some skepticism, because firstly, the Andhra Pradesh now has a Christian government, as in the chief minister is an evangelical Christian, and there are concerns that he might be partial towards Christians in that region. And also because of the way in which the Christian narrative operates. And as I've mentioned, Christianity is naturally antagonistic. Christians are much more attentive towards any kind of backlash or negative response. And the Bible teaches that Christians normally should be persecuted, and that if one is as a Christian is not being persecuted, then one is not following Christianity correctly. And so many Christians, and I don't mean this in a sense to gaslight. By gaslight, I mean denying or invalidating a person's own account of their own experiences. Um, but Christians largely are fairly attentive to any kind of negative response, and we'll often interpret that as persecution because that is consistent with biblical teaching. And I've encountered that a lot in my own personal experience. And so there is always this danger that accounts of persecution are going to be exaggerated. To summarize, Christianity, in comparison to other ideologies, is a problematic religion. Um, Secondly, in parts of the world, so in this particular video, I'm highlighting the example of Andhra Pradesh in India. But in certain regions, there is a lot of Christian activity. This activity can harm communities. It can divide people. It can divide families because now people have to live mutually incompatible lives or lifestyles. And a lot of this is funded from overseas. And the people who fund this often believe that they're helping. But as I've explained and as has become evident, they are not. So my request is, if you are a Hindu, or if you have some kind of connection to Hindu culture, maybe you're a Buddhist or a, or a Jain or a Sikh, if you have some connection to Hindu culture, um, one, it's important to be aware of these issues. Um, Many Hindus do not really understand Christianity especially well, mainly because Christianity is radically different from Hindu worldviews. And often Hindus tend to fall into two camps. Either the denialism camp, so justifying Christian beliefs, even denying Christian beliefs, so denying the more problematic Christian beliefs that even Christians themselves would openly admit. So, and the other camp, the other extreme, is Hindus who are very averse to Christianity, but don't perhaps understand the nuances, or the theology in depth, or the variation within Christianity. And so a lot of Hindus who are very critical of Christianity don't have very strong or robust criticisms. So if you're a Hindu please, please do some research of Christianity, about the politics of Christianity in India, about the history of Christianity within European colonialism, Christian theology, and also make other people aware. Perhaps write to churches if you know of any Christian groups that fund this activity. Just make them aware that some of what they're doing is actually causing harm overseas, and the narratives they may be told often are not entirely true. And if you are a Christian watching this, um, especially if you're an evangelical Christian, please, please be aware that some of what you're funding, or you might not be directly funding it, but some of what groups you are possibly connected to are funding is damaging overseas communities. And that mission work actually does cause a lot of harm. Be aware that the narratives you're told, whether that's by groups like Gospel for Asia, which has been denounced by Gospel for Asia has actually been denounced by various Christian groups now. But whether that's perhaps Open Doors, be aware that the narratives you're told often are not entirely accurate. Um, and please be very careful about which groups you're funding.